And of course, the national media overreactions have started in fold, in gross, whatever, with them saying, oh, it's not Derek Carr's fault, it's Josh McDaniels' fault, or Derek Carr is extremely underrated, he has like a passer rating of 85, or just the defense is really bad, he doesn't have any weapons, blah, 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 blah. Well, I say it was about darn time that Derek Carr got benched. And anyways, they decided to bench him for former Patriots quarterback Jarrett Stidham, which is an interesting move considering Stidham, well, he was a fourth-round pick from 2019 who really didn't do anything in New England besides give Patriots fans weird hope that he would be the next Tom Brady. Trust me, it's weirder than Broncos fans thinking that Trevor Siemian was going to be great, or Drew Lock was going to succeed. Although I will tell you, Drew Lock he's gonna win the Super Bowl with Seattle. Just if they put him in this week, they'll win the Super Bowl. But all kidding aside, Jarrett Stidham went over to the Raiders because Josh McDaniels went there and he's familiar with the system, so he just brought him over. Probably to help Derek Carr and just to, keep the household fed by bringing in that nice backup paycheck. However, he started this week and absolutely lit up the 49ers defense, who have maybe the best defense in the NFL. For 300 and something yards, let's say 320 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. And those 2 interceptions weren't really his fault. One of them was tipped, and the other one was he was being hit. It was on the O-line. He was throwing, and then he was hit. And the ball just couldn't sail to Davante Adams. So it was picked off, and the Niners won the game in overtime. But for a man's first start to come in there with all the pressure of being told, oh, you're Derek Carr, they're making a mistake for benching Derek Carr, all that, and to go out there and put up 320 yards, 3 touchdowns, is pretty darn impressive, especially since the Niners have one of the most ferocious defenses in the NFL with Bosa, Ward, whomever else is on that team, Warner, the Troy Polamalu 2.0 guy, absolutely loaded, and he just lit them up. But man, it is about time they benched Derek Carr. Talk about overrated as a quarterback. Everyone wants to point to his stats and say how he's this, he's that. Well, he ain't won much. Let's be real. The man came into this season with 1 playoff appearance in 8 seasons. 2, he technically led him to the playoffs twice, but he did not play in this first playoff game because he had a back injury. No, leg injury. I don't care what it was. It was brutal, and he could have won an MVP that year. But since then, he's not been as good. And for a guy who's called a franchise quarterback, you'd expect him to at least make the playoffs a few more times than just twice. I mean, Matthew Stafford in Detroit led the team to the playoffs 3 times in 7 years. You've had 8 years. You've only done it twice. He's had the weapons. Derek Carr, he can't make that excuse. He's got Darren Waller, who's one of the best tight ends in the NFL. Hunter Renfro's a scrappy, young, hardworking receiver who's great in the slot. Matt Collins was a surprise this year, who's done really well. And then they just go and add, Davante Adams. I mean, the best receiver in football to that team. And this year, they only have 6 wins. That does not compute. Josh Jacobs, who is the leading rusher in the NFL this year. Daniel Carlson, who is an absolutely great kicker. And Derek Carr can only muster 6 wins. I mean, the team as a whole has blown, 5 games of having a 10-point lead or more? That's the most in NFL history in a single season, by the way. Now, some of that's definitely on coaching. I mean, Josh McDaniels in the first half can script a beautiful game, and then in the second half he does something inexplicably dumb, like not do what he should, like throw it to Davante Adams or run it more. I don't know, but he also lost to the Colts the Chargers, inexplicable stuff. However, as we found out recently from Matt Ryan's choking loss to the Minnesota Vikings, the blown leads are not necessarily on the coach themselves. Matt Ryan was part of 28-3. He blew that lead. And he had a 33-0 lead over the Minnesota Vikings and blew that. Now, Kyle Shanahan had the 28-3 lead as the offense coordinator of the Atlanta Falcons and blew that. And then as the 49ers head coach, he blew that game. He blew the Super Bowl with up 10 points against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. He stopped running the ball for whatever reason. Didn't run enough play action. I'm not sure what, but sure, you can blame a little bit on Jimmy Garoppolo, but Kyle Shanahan also blew a lead to the Rams in the NFC Championship, so you gotta ask some questions there. It's like Andy Reid. Gotta ask some questions. The man keeps blowing easy chances in the playoffs. Obviously, he has that one fluke here, but other than that, a little questionable. Derek Carr also has no playoff wins. This is a big one. Now, Matt Stafford didn't have any playoff wins in Detroit, so that's fair. But and he did go on to win the Super Bowl with the Rams, but Derek Carr, if he's so great, as everyone says he is, should have more playoff wins. I mean, this man has fewer playoff wins than Baker Mayfield and Tim Tebow. Yes, Baker Mayfield and Tim Tebow. Ryan Tannehill. Who else you want to name? Guys who are supposedly worse than Derek Carr. Okay, I'll give you Tim Tebow. He did not make it as an NFL quarterback, but he was still incredibly fun. But Baker Mayfield led the Browns to the playoffs with a special teams coordinator as his head coach for that game. Derek Carr had a special teams coordinator as head coach last year with the ball, down 7, on the goal line, had the chance to beat the Bengals, knocked Joe Burrow out of the playoffs, send it overtime, potentially knock him out of the playoffs. The Bengals who represented the AFC. And he had 4 tries and couldn't convert a touchdown. This is a man who had a chance to come back against the Kansas City Chiefs after blowing a 17-point lead when inexplicably Josh McDaniels called a 2-point conversion. Now, I will admit that is a terrible call, but Derek Carr's got to convert that, and he didn't convert that. Derek Carr had his chance against the Los Angeles Chargers before he got benched and couldn't win there. And if it weren't for a ridiculously stupid play by Ramondre Stevenson and some help from the refs, the Raiders would have lost to the Patriots, which would have been another 10-point blown lead. And Derek Carr would have been part of that as he threw a pick 6 in that game. Also, I'd like to point out that in the last 2 seasons, the amount of times Derek Carr's had a 3-touchdown game, twice. Both this year. And yeah, you should have a 3-touchdown game when you have Devontae Adams and Darren Waller. Oh yeah, let's not to mention the week 1 against the Chargers. The Raiders had plenty of chances, had a chance to win, and Derek Carr threw 3 interceptions, so not exactly brilliant. Then Jarrett Stidham comes in with the same system and throws 3 touchdowns in his first start with the Raiders. But everyone's like, oh no, Derek Carr, he's so good, he's so great. I don't see it, honestly. Overrated. Now, I will say part of it's probably due to the team because the Raiders aren't great, but I mean, he had his chances. He's probably going to be moved on from this year. And it'll probably be towards the Raiders' benefit because they'll probably get a first because someone will overpay for him like Carson Wentz. Because they won't learn. He'll probably have a nicer career, maybe win a playoff game. I don't think he's a Super Bowl quarterback. Certainly isn't going to recapture an MVP for him. Nice guy. likable. But I think benching him is the right move. Okay, maybe it's not even the right move, but I think benching him is not as bad as everyone thinks. The Denver Broncos have recently fired head coach Nathaniel Hackett after a 4-11 start to a horrific, 4-11 start in what was supposed to be the Broncos' return to glory with Russell Wilson. Bradley Chubb has gone completely down the drain as Bradley Chubb's been traded. Russell Wilson's been washed for whatever reason. And Nathaniel Hackett turns out to not be very good. Now, this culminated on Christmas when the Broncos faced the beat-up, Super Bowl hungover, injured to heck and back, starting a quarterback, Baker Mayfield, who never even played for the Rams before 3 weeks ago, and lost 51-14. I'm not kidding. After an embarrassing failure like that, George Payton had seen enough and had fired Nathaniel Hackett on Boxing Day, the very next day. Man, that Christmas, he gave Hackett his heart. The very next day, he gave it away. So this year, to save Peyton from tears, he gave his heart to Jerry Rossberg, who, with the Broncos, went into Kansas City and almost won. Made Russell Wilson look a lot better. The offense was moving and had some creativity to it. The defense suffered, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about the fact that the Denver Broncos are now in need of a head coach. One who can replace this horrific endeavor that just happened. Now, there can be many people overreacting after the firing, and yes, that's a good thing because you should overreact sometimes. You should get your emotions out. You should be mad, you should be angry, but you should also consider what you should do afterward. And so people are going to see that Hackett was a first-time head coach. He was young, offensive, trying to be innovative, and completely bombed because he wasn't prepared. So people will see that and try to say, go the complete opposite direction. Get rid of him. We got to hire the most experienced head coach in the NFL, like Dan Quinn. He was the head coach. He made the Super Bowl. He's defensive. Been around for a while. But calm down. Yes, Dan Quinn could be a good coach, but we need to take some time and figure this out. The Denver Broncos, yes, Hackett was a mistake. The problem is, for the last 3 head coaches they've done, excluding Gary Kubiak, because he was good, he retired, which is a shame because he was great. He probably would have stuck around if he didn't have health issues. But the last 3 times they've gone for a head coach, it's basically been the exact opposite of what they just had. They're like, okay, need to remove the stench of that previous coach and start completely brand new. Vance Joseph was a younger guy. He had some energy, was extremely likable. He had the greatest weeks of practices of all time in Denver and was a complete failure after Gary Kubiak. So the Denver Broncos were like, all right, we need to go a completely different direction. We need an old head like Vic Fangio. Still defensive, but he's an old head. He's tough. Not very likable, but stern and is no nonsense. Will get us great games, no death by inches. Maybe not the greatest weeks of practice, but he'll be the one. Well, being the complete opposite of Vance Joseph, his weeks of practice were horrific. And he was so stubborn that he couldn't bear the sight of Drew Lock in a shooter sleeve. I just mean one of those throwing sleeves that he wears, and he decided to stupidly start Teddy Bridgewater over Drew Lock when Drew Lock was younger, had more potential, was finally going to go into the system for his second year. So after that, the Denver Broncos are like, okay, we need a complete opposite of Vic Fangio and Vance Joseph. We're going to go get a guy who's likable, but kind of low energy, cool, chill, man. I mean, Aaron Rodgers likes him. Nathaniel Hackett. We're gonna get that guy. He'll be a nerd, friendly, like Freddie Kitchens, only, you know, smarter. I mean, the man led Aaron Rodgers to back-to-back MVPs. And so they also decided to go extremely young everywhere else in the staff. And unlike Vic, he'll take responsibility. He'll be humble. And as we just saw, that went completely down the drain. We'll trade for Russell Wilson when this team needs a lineman and is honestly not in shape to contend. It just went right down the drain. And so this year, everyone's gonna be like, "Oh, we need Dan Quinn if we can't get a guy like Sean Payton. We need a complete opposite of Nathaniel Hackett." But I say no. What the Broncos need is the right guy. Now, who is the right guy? Well, it could very well be a Sean Payton. I mean, we know Sean Payton's great. Led the Saints to a Super Bowl and won it. Turned around Drew Brees' career. Is absolutely great. Obviously, he'd be great, but if you can't get him, where do you go from there? What do you need? Well, obviously, it can't be just exact opposite of what the previous coach was. Because there were some qualities to Nathaniel Hackett that could be great. They were just brought down by other bad qualities. Well, maybe for the next head coach, the Broncos need a combination of players, of former coaches. You need a nice combo. You need to take what was good about each one and try and multiply it. Obviously, you can't have everything good about it. But if you can find that guy, maybe it could work out to their benefit because, well, Nathaniel Hackett was extremely likable. I mean, every player loved him. It seemed like he was so nice. He was Aaron Rodgers' drinking buddy. The coaches were best friends with him. I mean, Ejiro Evero, Broncos defense coordinator, was offered the interim head coaching job after he was fired. He turned it down because he's best friends with Hackett. I mean, that's the kind of guy you want to be around. Just likable, full energy, all that. The only problem is he was too soft and took no responsibility for whatsoever. So, you can't have a guy exactly like Hackett, but if you take the likability and combine it with, say, Vic Fangio's stubbornness a little bit, his toughness, his no-nonsense, hey, do your job. We're going to beat the crap out of the other team. Need some toughness, like tough love. Because one thing you can say about Vic Fangio is the team look a heck of a lot tougher than it does now. The defense was clicking. The O-line certainly wasn't as bad as it is now. And his way of... I mean, he had the best record of all these coaches, so... You know something? He's extremely experienced as a coach. He had 40 seasons of being just around football before he was signed by the Denver Broncos, so you kind of need some experience there. And that tough mentality. Obviously, he was too stubborn. Not going to Drew Lock soon enough. Keeping Pat Shurmur for whatever reason. But he did have some good qualities. If you can combine that with Hackett's, great. Vance Joseph was incredibly energetic. I mean, he was extremely likable like Hackett. He's full of energy, former defensive player himself. And the team was certainly, how should we say, they're more amped up with Vance Joseph, especially in early seasons, because he always got out to great starts, like 2-0 starts. And the defense, which he was on his side of the ball, had more pick sixes than Evero or Fangio or Hackett. And obviously, Vance Joseph had the greatest most beautiful, unbelievable weeks of practice you will ever see as a player or head coach or special teams coach, whatever. They were great. The only problem with Vance Joseph was he was just not ready. He wasn't ready. Seemed like he overthought the game a little bit. The players weren't buttoned up as they should be. He obviously didn't have a quarterback. That didn't help. And while those weeks of practice were unbelievable, they could not perform on Sundays and Mondays and Thursdays when it mattered most. So, obviously that wasn't great. But his energy he brought, if you can combine that with those other two, be fantastic. Now, one thing all three of these guys lacked was head coaching experience. So, I can understand the argument Denver needs to hire a guy who was a head coach. That would be great. So, who has these qualities, or at least some of these qualities, who you could hire? Well, realistically, Evero might have him. I mean, seems like a nice guy. He's probably a little tougher on the team than Hackett. I'm just gonna assume. I don't know. His side of the ball is playing a heck of a lot better. Now he's young, so he hasn't been around football as long as possible, sadly. But maybe he's the right guy. Dan Quinn's a guy who's been around forever. He's like 55, something like that. He's been a head coach before. Obviously led the Falcons to the Super Bowl. Great defensive mind. I mean, Dallas defense is unbelievably good. His teams have had good offense with Matt Ryan, so you could probably get something out of Russell Wilson, you'd think. He's definitely energetic. I mean, he seems fun-loving, friendly. He could potentially be the guy. I don't know. One guy who I think has these qualities, obviously he's not young, but he's been a head coach before. He's energetic as all get out, experienced, tough, fun, but a little quirky. Jim Harbaugh. I mean, if you're asking me, that's the guy Denver should go after. Now, the question is, will he leave Michigan? I don't know. But every team he's gone to, Stanford, turned around and became great. 49ers made a Super Bowl. The Michigan Wolverines made the college football playoff in back-to-back years and finally defeated Ohio State. I mean, you know Jim Harbaugh. He's on the sidelines with his khakis, just going crazy all the time. And his teams have always become the most physical, especially in the run game, which Denver could really use because their O-line is trash. I mean, he got Colin Kaepernick to a Super Bowl and made him look good for a few years. I'm sure he can make an old Russell Wilson, who still has some play left in him, look good as well. I mean, teams just fight hard for him every time. And obviously he's been a head coach. Now, I'm a little concerned about his championship game histories, like lost the Super Bowl. They didn't seem prepared in the first half. Lost against TCU, didn't seem prepared in the first half. But you know what? Super Bowls are never really fair expectations for teams sometimes, so maybe if he gets there, who knows? But personally, I like Jim Harbaugh if he can't get Sean Payton. Would he leave Michigan? I don't know. But he's energetic, likable, tough, and a former head coach. The four qualities which Denver could take away and use to their advantage. What do you pay him? I don't know, $25 million a year? I don't care. It doesn't go to the team salary cap. Just pay him whatever he wants. I don't want him to have organizational control, obviously. You want George Payton to be drafting players because he is a good drafter. But that's my pick.